I'm sure you're all familiar with the Premier League, the world's best football division, with England's best football team. Of course, I'm talking about Brentford. I'm sure you would all agree. But the question I'm going to ask myself, because this is a channel about legal English writing, is the Premier League drafting that it does as good as the football that it produces? That's the question for this video. Before we get started talking about the Premier League and its ability to draft, I just want to share how I go about finding material to work with on a week-by-week basis when I'm trying to find text to improve from the point of view of plain language drafting and improving English drafting in general. I go to Google, as you can see here, and I'll just type in something like this. I'll type in contract. I'll type in legalese word that I'm looking for. For example, here in, maybe another ambiguous word that I'm looking for, like shall. And then I'll type in, sometimes I type in PDF, for example, just to try and find the documents themselves. And then I'll hit enter. And then what I'll do is I'll go straight down to the bottom and I'll go down to something like page 8. Something like that. And then right in front of me, I've got lots of documents, lots of materials, which I know I've got words that I can improve, I've got structure that I can improve, and so on, so on. And that's how I found the subject of today's material, because I landed upon the Premier League's page here, as you can see here, premierleague.com, and I found the terms and conditions of a competition that the Premier League is running. Now, that particular week when I found this, I was looking for things to do with tabulation because I was teaching issues to do with tabulation, and we'll touch upon that in today's lesson. And I found amongst all of the wonderful things that we can improve in this particular contract, I found things about tabulation. So that's how I found this particular page. So this is the link where I found this information. And I did what I guess a lot of people might do who are teaching legal English, teaching legal English writing. I would just go to an AI. I would paste the link into that AI. In this case, I'm using Claude. And I would say, look for grammatical errors in this page, or look for grammatical errors in that PDF. So at this point, I'm not even looking for drafting errors or anything like that. I'm just looking for grammar errors that really should be spotted before a document goes live. And in this particular set of terms and conditions, we've got a number of things that could be highlighted. So, for example, Claude identified in clause 1 that there is a duplicate word. As it says here, will disqualify you from participation in the prize draw, and any prize will be forfeited. And seeing is believing, as they say, so I actually copied and pasted the bit from that webpage and highlighted in red, as you can see behind me here, is exactly that issue. So for the purpose of fairness, let's read the whole sentence just to make sure that this isn't a mistake. Any non-compliance with or breach whatsoever of any of the terms will disqualify you from participation in the prize draw, and any prize will be forfeited, withheld, withdrawn, and reclaimed at our sole discretion and without any claim or recourse by you. So there wasn't some kind of weird drafting structure thing going on. This is just a mistake, but it doesn't stop there, because we've got inconsistent brand name spacing. If you're making a mistake with your own brand name, I would consider to be rather an embarrassing mistake. We've got misspelling, that non-transferable is spelt with 2 R's instead of only 1. We've got layout issues, which a proofreader should be spotting. So there's no space between 34 dot and the beginning of the sentence, where there should be, which is repeated again with clause number 38. And then you've got grammatically incomplete phrases in there. So in this case, the auxiliary verb are is missing. It should read may incur or suffer, or are likely to incur or suffer, but that are is missing. And then we've got missing prepositions. So as a result of or arising out of. So the preposition of is missing in this particular case. So adding all of these things up, I think we've got 7 in total. But remember, I said that I was looking for issues concerning tabulation. This is all very interesting, and it paints a picture of perhaps the Premier League should be doing a better job in terms of analysing its terms and conditions before it goes at least on the public-facing website. But I was looking for tabulation issues and particular errors that will exist if you do not tabulate. Now, I've talked a lot about tabulation. My first course that I published online, as you can see up there, Unit 13, all about tabulation. 13 minutes, 2,500 views, published 9 years ago. Then I did, in my other course, my 50-lesson course, which is a little bit shorter, I also talked about tabulation and parallelism and the importance of that. And I've done a number of other videos about it. And in those videos, I talk about why we should tabulate and the advantages that tabulation gives not only to the reader. Remember, we should be writing thinking about whether the reader can understand, but also from the writer's point of view, that if you tabulate, it gives you a chance to identify potential grammatical and logical and coherency mistakes in what you do. And bearing that in mind, I managed to find exactly that problem in clause 23 of the terms and conditions of the Premier League competition. I'll give you a few seconds just to read through it to see if you can spot it. Okay, I won't give you any time at all. If you want to pause it now and have a look at the video, then be my guest. But the issue here is a grammar mistake, and that is, well, first of all, before I show you that, I identified it, but Claude did not. Well, this is what Claude. After I told Claude to look for it, this is what Claude said. It said, "You're absolutely right. That is a valid grammatical error that I missed." Now, it could be the case that Claude missed this grammatical error because of the tabulation form that was used, that it didn't compute that text in the same way. But the issue, as you can see here, is either, in terms of British English grammar, is used with two things. So either this or that. But what we have here is an inline tabulated list, which has got 3 issues. So either 1, either 2, or either 3. Well, that doesn't make any grammatical sense, so it should be redrafted in some way. Either get rid of the either, which would be the easiest way to redraft that, or maybe it's a question of the fact that there shouldn't really be 3 points, there should only be 2. Only the drafter knows what was intended. We can interpret this in any number of different ways, what we assume that the drafter intended, but really the drafter should do a better job of this. So in total, there are 8 grammatical errors with these terms and conditions, 1 particular issue as regards tabulation. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about tabulation in this video. We've got this clause, once again, this clause in clause 39 of the same terms and conditions, which we need to improve following plain language principles of how we should tabulate. I mean, let's give them, say, a minor positive in that tabulation was attempted. So we've got I. So yeah, you can say it's tabulation, but it's inline tabulation. But the problem with inline tabulation is it doesn't help you identify the errors. It doesn't help you think about how you can redraft that text in a better way. We need to apply other techniques which you can find out about if you have a look at those videos, to improve this from the reader's point of view, and also to identify how the writer can best phrase what it is that they're trying to say, and identify plain language errors, which of course we wish to eliminate. So let's have a look at that. The first thing we can do is we can take the inline list and we can drop it into a normal tabulated form, which introduces a little bit of white space, or in this case brown space, and simply that one change, by introducing that extra space, makes that list a lot more accessible for the reader. Straight away, the reader can see that there are 3 issues, that and the reader's attention is drawn towards those 3 issues. In other words, the reader can say, I can easily identify there are 3 things here that I need to pay attention to. Then the understanding process begins, and then we start to have a look at plain language issues. And there's a number of things that we can do here. First of all, we can, using our plain language skills, identify that there are actually 2 lists within, at least from my point of view. Once again, I will restate, this is my interpretation of how this should be redrafted. For example, if the Premier League was to send me its documents for proofreading, this is what I would have done to this particular text. I would have broken it down not into 1 list, but I would have broken it down into 2 lists. So let's go through this. To the maximum extent permitted by applicable law, the Premier League, colon. Okay, so the colon is there, highlighted in green, to signify to the reader a list is going to start. Okay, point A. And we have to remember the logic in terms of grammar. So the Premier League disclaims all warranties express or implied in connection with the prize draw and the prize. Okay, that's the end of the first point. And because this is legal English doctrine tells us with legal English writing that we have to use a semicolon at the end of every point. Now, there is some argument to this if you are writing a legal document which is for the general public. Maybe you don't have to have the semicolon, maybe you can get away with a comma. But we can see in the original that they use semicolons, so let's just keep that style. Then we've got point B. So once again, the Premier League assumes no liability or responsibility for any. This is a second point, which I think belongs to the first list, if you see what I mean. And the reason why I say that is because we've got this massive repeated sentence, which I've crossed out in red. It says exactly the same thing as the sentence which introduces this list. So, to the maximum extent permitted by applicable law. Why do we have this repetition? If this repetition serves no useful purpose, and in my opinion it doesn't, then let's just strike it out. So we've got the Premier League disclaims all warranties, and then we've got the Premier League assumes no liability or responsibility for any. And now we've got another list, which is the 3 points that we originally saw, which are related to this second point, B, not to A. At least that's how I interpret it. And then we've got the 3 issues here: errors, mistakes, or inaccuracies. So then we've got, with B, we're introducing the nested list. So then once again, we need another semicolon for any semicolon 1, errors, mistakes, or inaccuracies. Now, in Old Legal English, there was a style which was used where after every single point in a tabulated list, you would say and, or you would say or. That's rather old-fashioned. No one does that anymore. It's simply enough to say and or, whether it's grammatically required or whether it's to make it easier for the reader to understand, between the penultimate and the last point. Okay, that's all we need. So we don't need to keep on saying and, or. And once again, in terms of ambiguous wording, it's worth stressing that and or is a completely meaningless term in the English language. I've done a video about this, words to avoid, ambiguous words to avoid. I've talked about it many, many times. The commentary from the judges is clear. They hate it when lawyers use and or. In fact, the judges have been quite explicit in saying that if a lawyer uses and or, not only is it a meaningless phrase in the English language, it signifies that the lawyer doesn't know what they're talking about. So 2 good reasons not to use it. One, from the point of view of ambiguity. Secondly, from the point of view it makes you look, as a drafting lawyer, you don't know what you're talking about. So we've got to choose which one is appropriate in this case. And for this nested list, I think it is or, whereas for the list between A and B, it is and. So we've got errors, mistakes, or inaccuracies. Then we've got point 2, personal injury or property damage of any nature whatsoever resulting from the participants' participation in the prize draw. Or point 3, personal injury, illness, infection, death. And here is another missing word, which is or mental trauma caused to the winner in relation to the enjoyment of their prize. That layout is immediately more accessible to the reader because of the use of white space and because of the layout. It allows the reader to understand all of the points easily. It allows the reader to find that information if needed in the future because they can remember it was part of a nested list. It follows all of the rules for good tabulation, with the one possible comment that I should make from a plain language point of view. Plain language doctrine does not like the use of Roman numerals for tabulated lists. And here we can see I. The rationale for that is that Roman numerals are not always understood by everyone, so therefore it's better to use A, B, 1, 2, 3, or some other design or structure which will allow the reader to easily understand what's being communicated or how the list is being designed. So, in summary, Premier League, best football league in the world, and I'll restate it, Brentford, the best football team in that Premier League. Hopefully we'll get into Europe this year. But Premier League drafting, from what I've seen for these terms and conditions for this particular competition, not the best, needs a little bit of improvement.